Okay, we're back from Newark and we are going to smoke this cigar. But before we smoke this cigar, I'm going to share a little bit more history with you. Bear with me as we embark on a very unique smoking experience. Something that is very special to me and in terms of history is just so rich. Now, I was lucky enough to actually acquire an original Blackstone matches. Now, as you can see here, this is a picture here from the vintage cigar store of the box that they came in. And of course, this cigar became available to me through the vintage cigar store. So I want to thank George very much for making this possible, especially in the case of Blackstone, right? Because while the majority of us would not remember Waitt Bond and Blackstone cigars because it was so before our time, it is still one of the, I would say, one of the biggest historical cigar manufacturers in the history of the cigar industry. So in that regard, this relic is extra special. And this cigar is actually from 1953. I actually had the opportunity sometime in 2018, 2017 to purchase a 1951 version from an online site that primarily sells current cigars, but has a luxury cigar section, and within it they have some of these historic brands. They've dried up in the last few years, but I had the opportunity to buy it, and I didn't buy it, and it was $50. And I didn't buy it. I guess I didn't know anything about Blackstone, but this particular Blackstone cigar was made, of course, possibly made in New Jersey, possibly made somewhere in, well, at the time, they were being made in a variety of locations. So you had satellite locations, right? And then you had the main warehouse. And it wasn't until much later on that there was a move to Pennsylvania. But this is circa 1953. And it's probably worth anywhere between $100 and $200 now. The specs on it, I'm going to gather, are about a 5 to a 5.5 in length, with a ring gauge probably closer to a Corona in regards to like a 42 ring gauge, maybe a 43. And the specs on this: Sumatran wrapper, of course. Binder, I'm not so sure. There's not much of a mention on the binder, and the filler, of course, Havana filler, pre-embargo. Okay, so here we see an ad from the Lewiston Evening Journal, April 24th, 1930. And in this ad, smoke a Blackstone when you want a mild cigar. Now remember, mild cigars were the thing in this time period, and for a long time, for that matter. But what I want to draw attention to here is all Blackstones wrapped in cellophane. Cellophane. This is 1930. This is the first ad that I found of the Blackstone cigar being wrapped in a cellophane. It's also one of the first brands of cigars that was wrapped in cellophane. It wasn't the very first, but it was amongst the first. And it was probably the first major brand to be wrapped in cellophane. Now remember, cellophane was invented by a Swiss, I believe a Swiss chemist or engineer in 1908. It wasn't something that you could say really went into full use until perhaps the 1950s. It was used sporadically throughout the late 20s, a little bit in the 30s, picked up a lot more in the 40s, and then by the 1950s, I believe that there were only a few businesses that used more cellophane than the cigar industry. And if I'm correct, when we're talking about Waitt and Bond, we're talking about cutting edge here. So by the late 50s, I believe only the bakery and the meat packing industry used more cellophane than the cigar industry. But this is at its early beginnings here, and Waitt Bond is making a statement in 1930 to use the cellophane. Now, it isn't lost on me that in 1929, Cremo cigar brand introduced a whole advertising campaign that really tore a hole within the cigar industry and brought about the whole sanitary conditions, not just in warehouses, but in the process of making handmade cigars. And we'll get into that when we do a review on Cremo. But I believe this was the response from a lot of cigar brands, and the ones that could afford it, especially like Waitt Bond, to sort of say, hey, we're doing handmade, yes, but we're introducing cellophane to protect the cigar and keep it clean, so to speak. And so that was what was said at the time. And as you can see, it says Blackstones are manufactured under the most sanitary of modern conditions, made with a pure Havana filler and imported Sumatra wrapper. They have a quality and flavor that you expect to find only in a much higher priced cigar. And to ensure Blackstone's freshness and purity, they come to you in a protecting jacket of cellophane. And so we urge you that you accept the advice of cigar girls everywhere. Just go to your tobacconist and try Blackstones. Try them for a week. Give your taste a chance to test their quality. We know that you'll agree that Blackstones are the only cigars that give you 25-cent quality for 10 cents. And of course, there was a broadcasting program attached to that. You had pretty Miss Catherine Menger, who finds that Blackstones are favorite. I can't make out the rest of it. But basically, this was one of the ads that ran in 1930. Now, by 1934, they upped the ante. And now it was a double wrapped and sealed cellophane. And this was from the Lewiston Evening Journal, June 12th, 1934. And these ads ran all throughout 1934 because it had, as you can see, an inner cellophane seal and an outer cellophane seal. Now, this one here, I don't know if it has that, as this is from 1953. I don't know if they scaled back. But as you can see, they're touting the newest cigar sensation, lasting freshness and aroma, safeguarded by double wrapping with moisture-proof cellophane, because that was an issue with the early versions of cellophane, how it didn't breathe. So it didn't breathe, and they needed to ensure and let people know you're not going to get any mold in this cigar by the use of this cellophane, and that assured the customers, of course, purity and freshness. Here's another one from the Schenectady Gazette. Later that year in October of 1934. Why risk getting dried out cigars? And then it shows you the inner jacket once again with the outer jacket. You know, advertising. And we're going to peel. Now, this is in the old style, of course, with the band on the outside. We're going to take that off right there. And, you know, even though Waitt Bond escaped from Boston due to the problems with the striking in 1919. In 1937, their New Jersey plants were also held up with a strike. And it took a while. They negotiated the wages and they were back in business. But in that time period, they started to think, well, maybe we need to explore our options. So, as you can see here, 1953 did not employ a double wrapper, a double cellophane. As you can see here, it just opened up like that. Okay. See the yellowing here. This is another picture of the cigars in the box from the vintage cigar store. And now we're looking at the cigar. We're going to put back on the band. I'm not going to give it the rinse. I'm just not. I could. And maybe I should, but I won't. You know, problems kept coming for this company. Despite its prominence, despite its power within the cigar industry, it was not immune to the labor issues that were affecting the entire cigar industry. So we're looking at now cigar makers after the layoffs. And this was an article written for Trends Within the Cigar Industry. And this was written in December of 1937. The general decline in the volume of cigar production after the 1920 occurred at the very time that an important part of the industry was attempting to improve its competitive position by marketing a low-priced cigar of good quality. To carry this out profitably, it was necessary to effect a substantial reduction in costs. This was tantamount to requiring a substantial reduction in labor costs. Since this item was a high percentage of the total, the perfection of the automatic bunching and rolling machine by 1919 provided a method for accomplishing the requisite cost reduction. In that year, the firm of Waitt Bond, manufacturer of the Blackstone cigar, attempted to solve its labor difficulties by moving its factory from Boston to Newark, New Jersey, and there installing automatic cigar-making machinery. The successful use of the machine process by this company was sufficient demonstration of the I am butchering that. Practicability of applying automatic machinery to the industry, and mechanization therefore was not slow to take hold. Now this is an ad from Life magazine, April 1941, and it's of course introducing a new Londres size extra. So it's 17% extra smoking in the new Blackstone Londres. Here's another ad, and this ad is from the 1940s, and of course it's detailing more information about how good Blackstone cigars are. Once again, 17% extra smoking. You can't go wrong with that. Here we have another ad, and Blackstone cigars make nationwide hit. Not a promotional from Life magazine. This is from 1941. Here's another wonderful little ad in color. 100% Havana filled for 100% enjoyment. And this is a cigar ad, vintage tobacco ad from the 1940s. I'll give the credit. Here's another little wonderful ad. A joyful couple. He's got himself a nice Londres cigar from Blackstone. He's smiling. She's smiling. Smoke doesn't bother her because it's a Blackstone. Now, I was able to pick this up as going to show you a little close up on eBay for a very low price, very good price. And the best part about it, of course, is that it is in mint condition. Whoever had this never bent it, never put it in his pocket. It just stayed somewhere. I mean, all the edges are practically mint. And as you can see, it says, relax, enjoy a Blackstone cigar. And it's never been used. It says the choice of successful men is what it says. And that's what Blackstone was during its time. It was the choice of successful men. And I know that a lot of you are going to frown upon me telling you that I'm going to light my 1953 Blackstone cigar with these matches. Why? Why? Well, I'll tell you why. Because in 1953, there were no fancy Fuente Chateau torch lighters. Bic lighters weren't a common thing. Zippos were starting to pick up in popularity. They were still pretty expensive. Not everybody had them. Sure, wealthy people had some form of fancy lighter device in their home. Usually it was very large. If they had a Zippo, great. But Zippos, if you recall, aren't the greatest thing to light your cigar. You know, unless you do the whole modern thing where you switch it out now with a torch. But back then, you had the standard Zippo, and then you had matchbooks. And matchbooks were what the common man used to light his cigar. It was the standard. You went back to this in a pinch or every day, for that matter. So I think it's fitting that I used this matchbox to light my 1953 cigar. And I think it'll turn out okay. I mean, if it worked for them for so many years, why be snooty about it and try to light it with a torch today? I'm just going to add another element of this experience or heighten it by using this matchbook. That is, I believe the date on this matchbook is from the 1950s. So it's going to match. I realize it may have been a little blurry, so I'm just giving you a little close-up of this. like I said, pretty much that's it. You know, I've been working on upgrading the cameras, and I did, but I'm still getting the handle of it. So there you go. Blackstone cigars. Okay, so the time has arrived. But this would never happen. I am going to use, just clip off a little bit there. We'll start from there, right? Start from there. And now that I've got that under wraps, I'm going to get the matchbook. There was no pre-drilled hole in this particular cigar, just in case you were wondering. See. Here we go. Keep browning. I don't care. It worked. Okay? You're just supposed to hold the flame out and let the sulfur burn so that it won't come in contact with the tobacco. Listen, I smelled no sulfur. These matches are from the 1950s. I'm just glad they lit. But you didn't toast a cigar. Guess what? And they need to. Especially in a smaller ring gauge, it's less of a concern, right? So you can kind of get away with it with a smaller ring gauge using the soft flame. And I'm going to tell you right now, from the minute that that flame hit the tobacco, an aroma, not of sulfur, but of a rich, sweet tobacco started to come forth. Retrohale on this. Minerals, sweet tobacco, little hay, and just it's just creamy right now. I mean, I just took 2 puffs, right? What do I know? 2 puffs into the cigar, but what I can tell you is this. I got that feeling. Yeah, you know that feeling I often talk about when you feel that the experience might be very, I don't know, super enjoyable, right? I haven't smoked a cigar in nearly 2 months. And my palate is very clean today. Just a very light meal before this cigar. Water, of course. And I really wanted to make sure that my palate was very clean for this one. So, having not smoked in so long, I feel adds to it, you know, and we'll see what happens here. Just creamy, light cedar and pepper picking up. Let's just talk about the 2 men behind this cigar. Right now, the aroma's coming in. It's a rich tobacco aroma. I smell a little pepper. But look, Henry Waitt of Waitt and Bond. He was born in Massachusetts. He was a Massachusetts man, and he's started from the bottom to the top. And as a young man, he started in the tobacco business, and he was a firm believer in education. He donated a lot of money to schools, to build schools for to further education. He declined to be involved in politics. He was a staunch Republican, the Republican of the times of Abraham Lincoln. Not that kind of Republican, but Lincoln's Republicans, right? And he was also a big temperance advocate. He would not allow alcohol on inside of any home, inside of any business that he owned. It just wasn't allowed. You couldn't drink anything. He was not part of that. He didn't like that type of lifestyle. He was married. He had children. He spent a lot of time working and a lot of time with his family, but he was not a man of vices. And he was also known as a very nice guy, just a generous guy, really down to earth. Despite making all of the money, he didn't go out and buy a million houses. He bought one really big, nice house. He upgraded a couple of times. He was just a genuine, salt of the earth type of guy. He was fond of animals and horses and children, and he was a member of the Masonic Order. He died of a heart illness at one of his summer homes. He was born in 1842, and when he died in 1902, he was 60 years old. And that was Henry Waitt. Quiet man, but a man full of grace. Now, on the other hand, Charles Henry Bond was a little bit more out there, out in the scene, right? He came from a wealthy family, legacy family from England. He was born July 13th, 1846. He died in 1908. He also died of what they said was an illness, but we'll get to that in a moment. He was more of a lover of music. He was that type of guy, music and arts, and he donated heavily to music and arts. And so he was very into that. He entered the cigar business in 1863 at the age of 17, and he was a firm believer in the publication of the printer's ink. And so was Waitt. He was also a Republican and a Unitarian in terms of religion. He was very wealthy, very, very wealthy. He was a real estate magnate, and he bought a lot of real estate. So cigars weren't his only thing. He had other sources of income. And but after the Panic of 1907, the troubles started to come, and financial crisis. And although we don't know exactly how that financial crisis affected Mr. Bond, we do know that it took a toll. And in 1908, he was found dead in his bathtub. He had left a note, and I think that the note that he had left was at first kept from the media and family. They didn't want to have it ruled a suicide. They wanted it ruled an accidental drowning in the tub. But he left a note. He left a note. And it was basically a suicide, In it, he basically said something to the effect of how they had killed him, his business partners had killed him, and he would be leaving everything to his wife. So this is the note. I have been killed by my friends and enemies. It is more than I can bear. I can stand it no longer. My heart is broken. I leave everything to my wife. And that is something that he left behind. In addition to that, it is said in many circles that Mr. Bond haunts Massachusetts Town Hall. Apparently upset about not getting recognition for some of the contributions he made, and as well as some things that he felt he had been wronged in. Exactly what, I do not know. And that came from the Biohistory of Massachusetts from 1909 on Mr. Bond. How's the cigar? It's mild in flavor. It's mild, no. It's mild in body. It's a mild body. But it's full of flavor. It's mild, smooth, creamy, light pepper notes here and there. Just really easy to smoke this cigar. I mean, it's just so smooth, and I dare say this cigar probably hasn't changed that much from when it was introduced. I mean, Blackstone cigars were basically mild cigars. But this is mild Cuban tobacco, right? Using a Sumatran wrapper, binder unknown, from 1953, Pennsylvania. And it's really just, I don't know, I don't think I've had too many vintage cigars like this. I have not. I want to just put in perspective that this is a business that began in someone's small kitchen and developed into this gigantic, enormous manufacturer of tobacco. And, you know, when they left Boston and they went to New York, you know, right around the corner, the following year, Prohibition set in. And that brought its own troubles. Men like to smoke and drink. And this wasn't something that was happening at the time unless you went underground. And so if we had cigars, we had to keep that straight because, you know, a lot of people weren't drinking. Not that Mr. Waitt really cared. He was pretty happy about Prohibition. And so 1920 also saw, you know, a drop in union membership in New York City, a 40% drop after that strike. It's so good you could almost inhale this, but I won't. Of course not. Now, Waitt Bond were incorporated in 1902 despite starting in 1870. And how far along were they with the big boys, right? How far along were they? Well, I'll tell you. The Blackstone cigar was introduced in 1885. But, you know, you have companies like Lorillard. Lorillard, most famous for Newport tobacco, you know, Newport cigarettes. Started as a snuff company. Had their beginnings in New York City, Brooklyn, and Bronx, and so forth. But they were bought out by American Cigar eventually, I believe in the 1920s. And they were actually bought out by American Cigar, right? That American Cigar, which belonged to American Tobacco. So when you think of American Tobacco, you're going to think of Buck Duke, the man who brought the world cigarettes as we know them. But Buck Duke also had a big interest in cigars. But remember, cigars were not profitable. I know that, you know, we read about all of these cigar companies that popped up in the late 1800s, early 1900s, but they were not, you weren't going to get rich off selling cigars. You could make a small profit, but the industry wasn't big enough yet. And it wasn't really until the, I would say the early to mid 1900s that you really had an increase in cigar production where people started to make some good money. But even then, it wasn't like the kind of money that people were making off cigarettes later on, right? You know, General Cigar began as United Cigar in 1906 and then became General Cigar in 1917. The Bayek brothers were founded in 1920. They incorporated in 1923, changed the name to Bayek Cigars, and in 1926, they built a new, the largest in the world, factory, tobacco factory with air conditioning. So, you know, you had Waitt Bond that had initially had this huge factory that I showed you at 716 Columbus Avenue in Boston. It was built in 1903. You had this huge factory, but by 1926, you know, they were moving further along. Now we had air conditioning. Now we had the blueprint for the perfect factory. Consolidated Cigar began in 1921, and their flagship was Dutch Masters. Mild, but so flavorful. I'm getting sweet notes, cream notes, light pepper. In 1920, all of the major corporations had headquarters in New York City. American Tobacco, Lorillard, a bunch of them. They all had flagship headquarters in New York City. In 1921, to compete in the post-war boom, Pennsylvania makers had shifted to shredded domestic filler, frequently mixed with Puerto Rican tobacco and or Havana scrap to keep the price at 5 cents. Among the first brands of cigars to use cellophane were the Blackstone cigars. Clear Havanas were mainly being sold in New York City. 60% of the Clear Havanas were in New York City, not Tampa, Florida. So just to give you an idea of how the industry shifted, in 1921, Clear Havana was a New York thing. In 1922, 1 out of 10 cigars were machine made. And in 1925, Por Larrañaga became the first Cuban factory to use machines and make a machine-made cigar. And that was followed by protests and boycotts. So they got a taste of what Waitt Bond was experiencing at the time, a few years later. And in 1929, of course, we had the spit ads by Cremo cigars, which was introduced by American Tobacco under the American Cigar Company. Why did I tell you all of that? I told you all of that so you can kind of get an idea of what the competition was like, what the competitors were in that time period, and to show you just how far ahead Waitt Bond was of even American Tobacco, the giant American Tobacco that had its legacy under Buck Duke from North Carolina. It was something extraordinary for this Boston, New England company to hold such a large share of the market and to command such respect. Now, don't get me wrong. They were not the best cigars. They were the best American cigars for a while, or amongst the best American cigars. They still paled in comparison to La Corona. La Corona was basically cream of the crop. I've told you that before. I showed you their warehouse in New York, New Jersey, or in Trenton, New Jersey as well. They were number one. They were considered to be, everything you wanted in a cigar, but they were much more expensive. They were not a 5-cent cigar. And for a long time, 5-cent cigars were a thing until after World War I. After World War I, everyone had to basically find a way to keep the price down at 5 cents, and it was not easy. It was not easy at all. Okay, so this is from the Vintage Cigar Store's pictures on this cigar, and as you can see, this is from the district of PA. This is where this cigar was manufactured. And you can see here, George actually measured it. It is 5 inches. I'm going to say about 42 ring gauge, 42. To sum up the history, what happened with Waitt Bond, right? What happened with such a wonderful cigar manufacturer? They ended at 99 years. They could not make it to that 100th anniversary. Why? Well, in 1961, they moved to Scranton, Pennsylvania. And even though they took over the factory, bought the factory off of a former competitor, RG Sullivan, I believe it was. Although they took over that business, they still struggled. Everyone was struggling in the 1960s. This is 61. I mean, we're at the point where, Castro has pretty much decided he gets no more Cuban tobacco. And in 1961, the Toledo Blade indicates that they moved to Pennsylvania, to Scranton. And R.G. Sullivan blamed his loss on Fidel Castro. So, things were just going downhill from there. I looked at their sales from the 60s, and they were basically in the red almost every single year. In 1968, the U.S. Securities and Exchange and Commission Act of 1934, they indicated Waitt Bond sustained losses from 1964 to 1967. In 1970, the Bryan Times indicated that Waitt Bond had made a last-ditch effort to make some money, and they invested in something called this is you gotta hear this. New wrappers made of tobacco. They were trying to make some money off the cigarette business, and it basically they created these wrappers. They said it is based on the view that excessive heat in the combustion of paper is what causes cigarettes to give off hotter tars and release more nicotine and carcinogens than are found in the smoke of cigars or pipe tobacco. This isn't a new idea, has been advanced from time to time ever since the cigarette was invented. So far, the tobacco wrapper, developed jointly by a Puerto Rican subsidiary of the 90-year-old Waitt Bond Incorporated and a German firm, is being used only on Canadian brand of little cigars called Scotty and 2 cigarette brands made by the international Upman Company in the Canary Islands. Waitt Bond used to make Blackstone, Hayden Hall, and some other brands of cigars. Rappaport sold off the cigar business 3 years ago to get money to finance the development of the tobacco wrapper. It wasn't enough, he said. The job proved quite difficult, and I've had to invest a lot of my own money. And of course, we know that this idea didn't work because it, for cigarettes, the idea of using the tobacco paper, it became obsolete once they found a new proper form of combustion for the cigarette. And that pretty much spells the end of Waitt Bond, but they hang on for just a little bit. The new cigarette wrapper was set to cut nicotine. Bold-faced lie, not true. A lot of the things that they were saying at the time were just not true. They weren't alone in that. And so that's pretty much what happens. In the 80s, a lot of different people, I believe Patricia A. Cooper, she wrote, something from Once a Cigar Maker, and she wrote some things in regards to Waitt Bond. And listen, it just didn't look pretty for the end. This is a shot here of, and as you can see here, there are people hanging out of the windows. Forgive that. And a lot of people think that in this center shot right here, right there, that might be Waitt Bond themselves when they opened up in 1872, 1873 at Blackstone Street. Now, I had stated that the building that they had moved into originally was built in 1795. It wasn't. It was built in 1845. The garish block was built by a real estate guy that was one of the first, descendant of one of the first settlers in New England, and from a very, very prominent family. So that's the building that they set up in. And I'd be amiss if I didn't add that to summarize how the cigar industry faced an end. They faced an end, and with the union issues, the strike issues, and the machine-made cigars, and the Cremo ads talking about sanitary conditions and so forth, and how Waitt Bond really just, struggled in the midst of all of that and persevered for 99 years. It's a shame they didn't get to that 100th anniversary, but they did themselves no favors towards the end. But I've been talking a lot today, and I haven't been telling you too much about the cigar. I'm sorry. But I assure you that this cigar is a lot better than a lot of the cigars that are being sold today. A lot better. It's mild. It's not a pepper bomb. It's not harsh. It's not strong. It's not any of those things that you don't want. But for a vintage cigar, this baby really packs a punch in flavor. It's smooth. It's creamy. I mean, it's been consistent in its flavor of being creamy, smooth, light spices, light hints of cedar. And it hasn't really had too many transitions, which is fine by me, because all the way through I've been enjoying it. I had one moment where the burn line got a little wonky, took care of it, never happened again. And I just gotta tell you, man, this is a cigar worth hunting down if you want to taste a piece of history. But I always recommend know where you're gonna get these cigars, know how to get them. There is no better place to get them than the vintage cigar store. And I don't say that just because I have a fondness for the company. I'm saying that because this is the proof in the pudding right here. This tastes amazing. Gotten past the heart of the cigar, and it's just, now it's picking up in pepper, a little less creamy. Ah, man, it's so good. So good. I kid you not. I know that this is a long review. It's historical. If you want to watch it in chapters, absolutely watch it in chapters. I recommend that. But for me, this has been very special. I also have to give a big shout out to Mike at the High Point Bar, which is the bottom location on the first and second floors of the garish block building that I was in, which I mistakenly said was built in 1795, and it wasn't. It was built in 1845, as I said before. But I want to give a big shout out to Mike because he gave me full access up there, and he was just really cool about everything, and really eager to learn more about the building in which he worked in. So good. Man, so good. I can't stop saying that, and I'm sorry if I'm being repetitive on that. But as I go down to the nub now, I'm gonna nub it because it's nub worthy, and I want to thank you all for tuning in and watching this review of the Blackstone cigars and Waitt Bond, and how important they were to the cigar industry. Thank you all, ladies and gentlemen, for watching this episode of Backyard Cigars. I almost said Blackstone Cigars. Thank you so much. So good. So good. Creamy.